Today on BRStv Investigates, it's time to really explore the Radion G4 XR30 Pros. Hi, I'm Ryan, your host of BRStv Investigates, a weekly YouTube series which explores popular reefing theories, products, methods, what the manuals are missing with a focus on putting them to the test, and then we give away everything we test at the end, which this week means 4 free Radion Pro XR30s. Today we're going to take a complete look at that Radion XR30 G4 Pro LED lighting module with the focus on 3 important factors based around coral health, visual appeal, and available features weighted in that exact order. The real goal here is always to keep healthy, visually appealing tanks. Everything else is secondary. Diving right into it, we're going to look at coral health factors with providing adequate PAR, how that PAR is distributed, and spectrum. Our focus is always on SPS and higher demand corals when evaluating PAR because almost any common reef tank lighting can provide the lower PAR required for LPS and lower light corals. That range for SPS that we're shooting for is 250 to 350 in as much of the tank as possible. That range coming from our episode called How Much PAR for SPS, which dives into that question from all angles. I'm going to tell you right now, the Radion XR30 Pro is a 600 horsepower Italian sports car of the reefing world. Similar to that, on many fronts, this light is capable of leaving many of the better reef lights out there in the dust. But if your approach is to jump in and put the pedal to the metal, a lot of unprepared reefers are going to crash and burn. It's critical to understand this is one of the most powerful reefing light sources out there, capable of almost anything, and it needs to be treated with that kind of respect if you want to produce the desired results. Supportive of that, we're going to start by looking at PAR levels produced by a single Radion XR30 Pro in a 24-inch cube with water and the back painted black. The suggested mounting height for an XR30 in a 24-inch area is 9 inches above the water, so that's our mounting height, 9 inches above the water and 8 inches from the top of the tank. Similar to other lighting tests, we tested a depth of 6, 12, and 18 inches in the tank with a 36-point measurement grid. Starting with all channels tuned to 100%, measuring at a depth of 6 inches, we saw a pretty considerable hot spot in the center with the PAR numbers in the 800s, but mostly from the 4 to 800s from left to right. Overall, at a depth of 6 inches, we're seeing a 36-point average PAR right on the edge of 500 at 484, which is one bright light. You'll notice the front of the tank is in the 2 to 300s and not quite as bright as the sides, and that's likely due to the shape of the module and orientation of the 2 LED pucks, where the LEDs are positioned closer to the sides of the tank than the front. With the 2 LED pucks spaced out like this, it's predictably going to distribute light in a slightly more rectangular shape, which is likely desirable in many cases because a lot of our tanks are rectangularly shaped. However, we are exceeding double our SPS PAR goal of 250 to 350 here. I'd also note our goal of 250 to 350 fairly closely matches the range of 225 to 300 PAR that EcoTech's suggests for SPS corals in their coral lab experiments. This 225 to 300 PAR range was developed by working with Reef Wholesale to identify PAR levels which maximize coral coloration, coral growth, and efficiency. Moving down to 12 inches in the middle of the tank, the spherical HEI optics are starting to disperse the light pretty evenly. The 36-point average is still 441 PAR, but with the exception of the back of the tank because it's painted black and doesn't reflect light the same as the other sides, almost every point is within 100 points of each other and in the 4 to 500s, still a pretty intense light. Now moving down to 18 inches deep, the 36-point average is 395 and the light is pretty evenly dispersed in the 3 to 400s. You note the sides and the front of the tank are actually brighter than the middle at this depth, which is counterintuitive because a lot of reefers assume it's always brightest directly under the light, but as we get deeper into the tank, it's pretty typical to see higher numbers on the side and front because there's a lot of light reflecting off the glass back into the tank. So if your approach is to turn all the channels to 100% and put the pedal to the metal because more horsepower is always better, the XR30 Pro has what you want. Some of you might have a tremendous amount of experience driving a tank like this, acclimated your corals over long periods of time to this type of intensity, or just lucky, but most reefers should get ready to spin out pretty fast. This is just way higher than we recommend, or the recommended range that EcoTech found in their own coral lab experiments as well. So you can obviously just turn the lights down considerably, but you can also adjust the spectrum and intensity of each individual LED group to reduce the PAR, which is what most people will do. So showing the light at 100% in all channels is not very fair or realistic, and in all honesty, I think I just wasted a lot of time showing you the 100% because almost no one will mount them at the suggested 9-inch mounting height and turn all the channels to max. The Radion more or less gives you the keys to the spectrum kingdom, and you can slide the bars to make up pretty much any spectrum you might like, and has some presets as well. However, my personal recommendation is to start with what the pros use and also document it in the Coral Lab study. That's what they call the AB Plus program. And for those of you that are wondering, it's designed to emulate the very popular Blue Plus and Aqua Blue Special T5 bulb combination from ATI. This is simply the UV in all the blue channels at 100% and the white, green, and red at 24%. This produced solid growth and the best coloration for a majority of the corals in their experiments. Very similar to that, they also have a program that emulates the popular Phoenix 14K halide bulb, which they reported as having just slightly higher growth rates. The spectrum was pretty similar, however, with subtle tweaks. The UV and blue channels still at 100%, white at 24%, green 17%, and red at 30%. I think this is just a solid example of why the keys to the spectrum kingdom should be considered an advanced tool for the trailblazers and not just something that you slide around until it looks good to the eye. Just the tiniest shift in the amount of green, but probably more importantly red, can make a significant difference in both the growth and coloration of your corals, particularly SPS. So in that spirit, we also tested the PAR levels of the AB Plus program, which honestly seems to make a lot more sense because it's much closer to what a lot of reefers will use than 100% on all channels. The intensity of the program is still 100%, but these specific spectrum groups have been tuned down to the AB Plus levels. Result is at 6 inches deep, the 36-point average dropped approaching 30% in PAR to 354. There's still a significant hotspot in the center, but we're seeing mostly 4 to 600s now, with the lower numbers in the front and back of the tank due to the rectangular design. Moving to the middle of the tank, the 36-point average is 321, but the distribution of the light is super flat for a light at this depth, and again, likely a component of the HEI spherical lenses, but other than the back, almost every single point is in the 300s, which is super impressive. At 18 inches deep and approaching the bottom of the tank, we have a 36-point average of 293 with almost every single point in the tank in that 250 to 350 range that we're looking for. Again, you'll notice the sides and the front of the tank are the highest PAR because of the glass. As you can see, once you adjust the light to more typical spectrums and how the average reefer would actually use it, the Radion XR30 G4 Pro is still a very powerful light, and you're likely going to want to turn it down 15 to 30% for SPS corals, but it's actually producing very solid, usable PAR numbers. I did want to provide some insight into the accuracy that turning down the lights has on adjusted spectrum, so we kept the AB Plus spectrum adjustments, but adjusted the intensity down to 50% and looked at the 36-point averages at each level. Hopefully this will help many of you that don't own PAR meters to use today's data to adjust your own lights a bit better. At a depth of 6 inches, the full power 100% intensity AB Plus setting had an average PAR of 354, turned the overall intensity down to 50%, dropped it to an average of 200, so an overall reduction of 43%, not exactly 50%, but pretty close. At 12 inches, the 100% 36-point average drops from 321 to 182 at 50% intensity, which was about a 43% drop again. Not surprisingly, at 18 inches, the full power had an average of 293, and half or 50% power is an average of 182, which is just under the 40% reduction. Overall, I think it's safe to say that the intensity reduction bar isn't perfect, but it's pretty darn close. In our experience, a 50% reduction resulted in around 40% reduction in light, a factor you can likely use if you want to use any of our charts to hone in on a PAR range for your tank without making the investment in a PAR meter. Moving on to distribution of that PAR, there's no question there will always be a hotspot directly under the light source. This isn't limited to LEDs because it's true with halides and even T5 bulbs as well. However, halides often use large reflectors to distribute that light over a wide area, and T5s use an array of lights, whereas LEDs are often sold in small, compact form factors, which result in fairly significant hotspots in the upper portions of the tank. With the Gen 4 Radions, EcoTech took a leap forward in distributing that light in a wider pattern by using the spherical HEI lenses, which distribute that light over a wider area. Likely why you saw some hot spots 6 inches deep in the tank, but at 12 and 8 inches deep, the light was well distributed. However, there are two other major ways to look at how they distribute the light. One is simply by raising the light source up, and the other is by adding multiple light sources in. We'll look at both options. Looking at the Radion setup guide, they suggest a mounting height of 9 inches for a 24 to 30 inch area and 11 inches for a 30 to 33 inch area. While we're testing a 24 inch cube, I still wanted to share the impact of raising the light up 2 inches to the 11 inches off the water. I think you'll all be fairly surprised by the results. So looking at all channels at 100% intensity with a 9 inch mounting height right next to an 11 inch height at a depth of 6 inches, you can immediately see there's a dramatic difference in how the light is distributed in the tank. There's a par drop from 484 to 455 between the two 36-point averages because some of the light is spilling outside of the tank at the 11 inch mounting height. However, at a mounting height of 11 inches from the water, the hot spot is almost completely eliminated. It's still slightly brighter in the center, but going from left to right, we're looking at 530 par to 630, which is only a 100 par difference. This is profoundly different than the 5 to 800 swing. There's just no question about it. Moving the light up just 2 inches smoothed out the distribution of par dramatically. The effect is less dramatic once we drop down to 12 inches deep in the tank because the G4 Pro Radion already distributed the light fairly well at this depth, but it's a solid performance either way. Same can be said of the 18 inches deep in the tank. The numbers are slightly lower, but the overall distribution of light at the bottom is fairly similar. Net lesson here is you can significantly reduce, if not almost completely remove the hot spots by simply raising the lights up a couple inches. That said, there are two elements to be aware of. First, there'll likely be some spillover into the room by raising it that high. That can be visually annoying if you don't have a hood. And related to that, the overall power numbers will be somewhat lower by raising the light up, but with a light this powerful, I don't think that will be an issue for anyone. Related to all this, I would note that the work that Coral Labs did had the lights at 100% AB plus intensity mounted 2 feet over the tanks. This is similar to other aquaculture and wholesale facilities that I've seen use Radions, such as Worldwide's coral facilities, where the lights are mounted fairly high. Mounting the lights that high not only distributes the light much more evenly, it also dramatically reduces the potential for undesirable shadowing single points of light often produce. Spillover just isn't a concern in these environments. This moves on to how well do the Radions perform in multiple light arrangements, not just looking at the overall par, but also looking at how the lights interact with each other and the overall distribution of that par. We're going to mount them at 9 inches above the water because that's a distinct recommendation, but you already have an idea of how moving them up will impact the results. We're going to look at 4 common configurations on this 4-foot, 120-gallon tank. A 2-lamp installation, a 3-lamp installation with both configurations, lamps turned lengthwise as well as turned front to back. Lastly, a 4-lamp configuration with the Radions turned front to back. I'm going to test them at 100% intensity using the AB Plus configuration simply because I think that's the most useful to the reefers watching this video. Looking at the 2-lamp install, there are 2 fairly predictable hot spots approaching 700 in the center with the vast majority of the tank in the 4 to 600s. Moving down to 12 inches, you can see everything flattens out a bit with most of the numbers in the 3 to 400 range, but there's one notable element. Notice that the center of the tank is now the brightest portion of the tank because this is where the light from the 2 separate Radions intersect. At 18 inches deep, the distribution is fairly even, but I think it's valuable to note that other than the back of the tank, the lowest par numbers are now again directly under the Radions. The highest numbers are between the 2 lamps and the front of the tank where the light and resulting reflections are intersecting the most. Overall, 2 lamps perform pretty well, and because it's lower cost, I'd assume the most common installation. However, a lot of reefers end up with 3 because they're looking for both a more even distribution of light as well as a reduction in shadowing effects that comes with spreading out more light sources over a larger area. First, we installed the 3 lamps lengthwise, similar to the 2-lamp install, and at a depth of 6 inches, you can immediately see the 2 hot spots evened out significantly and is a much more even distribution of light in this tank at this depth. The par is pretty insane and mostly 5 to 900s across most of the center of the tank. However, the front of the back of the tank is much lower. Moving down to 12 inches deep in the tank, we're again seeing the center of the tank is the brightest portion where all the lighting sources intersect. However, the sweet spot is much larger now. Again, with 3 Radion Pros at 100% AB+, we're looking at 4, 5, and 600 par in most of the tank, but I think most people realize you're probably going to tune them down to 40 or 50% in this case. At a depth of 18 inches, the highest par will again be the front and center of the tank, and you can see the areas on the right and left side of the tank which are a bit lower, but overall most of the points are fairly close to each other. Now the Radions can be mounted in multiple directions, and turning them so that they're oriented front to back will distribute the light towards the front and back of the tank. So let's take a look. At a depth of 6 inches, the same 3 lights spaced out evenly but turned front to back, you can see what initially looks like 2 lamps mounted close together on the par chart, but those peak numbers are actually where the light intersects from the 3 light sources. Predictably, the light from front to back is more evenly distributed, but not as even left to right versus the other orientation. Similar effect when we move down to 12 inches deep. The overall distribution is fairly flat, but the brightest points are still between the light sources. Front to back, the light is more evenly distributed. At 18 inches, the light and reflections are still intersecting the center and front of the tank, but overall the distribution is a bit smoother. If I had to pick between the 2 different orientations, it would depend a lot on the specific install and aquascape, but in general, if you're considering 3 of these lights, it's probably an SPS tank, and I think the most benefit is mounting the lights front to back and illuminating the corals from all or as many sides as possible, but again, this depends on the implementation and aquascape. However, it is possible to have the best of both worlds by spacing them 1 every foot and using 4 Radions. Now for most people, this is a pretty ridiculous install, but a lot of the SPS reefers of the world who have those epic wall-to-wall SPS tanks have or are considering installs like this as they try to achieve the highly diffused light their old T5 and halides with large reflectors achieved, primarily as a method of eliminating undesirable shadowing effects. So in that spirit, this is what 4 Radions at 100% intensity and the AB plus setting at a depth of 6 inches looks like. Now the par is over 1,000 and you're going to have to tune these down dramatically, but it's obviously the best distribution of light yet, and for good reason. There's a total of 8 LED pucks spread out over the top of this tank. Moving down to 12 inches, the effect is the same with the majority of the tank in the 6 to 700s. You can see visually a huge swath of this area is very similar par, and once the intensity is tuned down, it's going to be near ideal performance. At 18 inches deep, more of the same, that sweet spot of similar par numbers is pretty large, with the center and front always being the brightest. Overall, the Radion is amongst the highest par light sources out there, and for a modular light, the HEI lenses seem to do a pretty solid job of distributing light, particularly well in the center and bottom of the tank. While most softy LPS and mixed tank owners will almost certainly be happy with 2 of these on a 4-foot tank, those SPS nuts looking for wall-to-wall corals might find some advantages by adding additional light sources and adjusting the spacing and intensity. Moving on to the third element of coral health, spectrum. We look at spectrum from 2 angles, the available spectrum offering and the ability to blend the multiple individual spectrums into a single cohesive spectrum. First off, the Radion Pro has one of the widest variety of spectrum LEDs out there. Most notably is the thick mix of various near UV and blue spectrums, much more inclusive than some of the other options out there, particularly in that deeper blue range and the 400 to 420 nanometer range, which really brings out a lot of pop in a lot of corals. In general, they cover all the common ranges and then some. So how well do they blend the spectrums? Well, each individual LED is under its own HEI lens designed to spread out in a fairly wide pattern. We're going to look at the performance from 2 angles. A 9-point static spectrum measurement taken in air with a light 19 inches above the sensors. This is designed to identify major issues in design, lenses, and spacing of the LEDs. Looking at all 9 points, I think you can see that in a static environment, the blending is done reasonably well. There's only what I would refer to as subtle changes in spectrum between all 9 points. Next look is at what we call dynamic spectrum and how the light performs in a more real environment where the light needs to interact with the surface ripples, which are essentially lenses themselves. For this, we move the light down to 9 inches off the water, add water movement to the surface of the tank with a power head, and then take 9 measurements at the bottom center of the tank where the spectrum blending should be the best. In this case, you can see there are some pretty noticeable spectrum changes between all 9 points. While the peak stays the same, the rest of the mix changes pretty significantly. I'm fairly certain this is because the water surface ripples are catching the light from the individual LEDs and lenses and causing what I would refer to as spectrum hotspots. This spectrum or color separation is actually something that you can see with the naked eye and a color component of the disco ball effect that's frequently referenced with LEDs and reef tanks. In the end, less than perfect spectrum blending is likely going to be a reality with a lot of LED options out there that use individual reflectors or lenses for each LED, which is almost all of them. It's just a significant challenge to get a cluster of different color LEDs and lenses to cohesively blend into a uniform spectrum that isn't refracted separately by the surface of the water. We wanted to see if this effect was less significant if you raised the light up to 24 inches off the surface of the tank, similar to some of the propagation and wholesale installs, and the change between the 9 measurement point was indeed more muted, but it was still noticeable. This type of spectrum blending performance certainly isn't preventative to success, because there's a critical mass of users successfully using designs like this, but at the same time, it's really difficult to clearly demonstrate small changes in spectrum both affect growth and coloration significantly and not come to the conclusion that uniform blending and distribution of that desired spectrum isn't as important as well. So all in all, even though the spectrum blending could be somewhat better, this light certainly can grow corals, and I would call it that 600 horsepower Italian sports car of the reef tank lighting world, capable of almost anything you might want to do with it. But the reefers who put the most effort into installing, configuring, and tuning it to your particular desires will likely get the most out of it. Considering the significant differences between mounting heights, spacing, and configuration, I certainly think a low-cost par meter is a pretty valuable tool here to achieve your goals. Moving on to visual appeal and how the light makes the corals in tank look with color pop, contrast and sense of depth, shimmer, dimming, lunar lights, and physical appeal. Because right after coral health, I think the main thing here is we want the tank and corals to look awesome. That's kind of the whole purpose of building and maintaining a reef tank in our homes. Starting with color pop, there's no question the Radion makes the corals look awesome, and I think a lot of that is the inclusion of a higher ratio of those deeper blue and violet spectrums that really highlight the coral's natural fluorescence. There's no question you won't be disappointed by the ability of the Radion to make the corals fluoresce and look awesome. In relation to contrast and sense of depth, the compact LED pucks create a very high contrast image with visually interesting shadows and a three-dimensional feel to the tank, something that is completely missing from highly diffused low contrast light sources like T5s. A contrasty, visually interesting image is always somewhat at odds with even coverage and reducing shadows, so the SPS fanatics who install one module per 1.5 feet or even foot will find somewhat lower contrast with the additional light coverage and reduced shadows, but it will always be far from a flat image. Moving on to shimmer. Shimmer is the element which adds that sense of movement to the tank, makes the tank come alive, and transitions the tank from a picture of a reef to an actual section of the reef in your home. However, LEDs often have a very sharp, flickery shimmer, which is often referred to as a disco ball or even TV static effect. Some people notice it more than others, and everyone has a different tolerance level for it. I'll openly share that I'm very picky about shimmer and very critical about how natural it looks. So in that spirit, I have to share that this isn't my favorite part about this light. There's a fairly obvious disco ball effect from the 46 LEDs and individual lenses, and it's hard to show on camera, but you can distinctively see the individual colors flashing around on fairly solid color surfaces like sand and the back of the tank. I'd say this is something that won't bother a vast majority of reefers, but if you're highly sensitive to this type of thing, you'll probably notice it. I would note that this is very manageable by adjusting the amount of surface flow at the surface of the tank, as well as raising or lowering the light. The Radion obviously comes with a variety of dimming options using their software or the Reef link, which allows you really any type of dusk to dawn effect you might want, as well as the opportunity to explore adjusting intensity and DLI or daily lighting intervals to keep the tank lit longer, but at lower intensities to achieve the same or similar results. I would call this as fully featured dimming option as it gets. In relation to that, the Radion also has the ability to function as a low power moon or lunar light. It's not just a dim blue light, but actually simulates the actual lunar cycle. This not only looks cool, but a lot of people feel like it prevents fish from getting spooked and jumping out at night, as well as promote natural behaviors like fish, invert, and even coral spawning events in the tank. And outside of how cool Radions can make the corals look inside the tank, I have to say the modules themselves look sharp outside the tank as well. They're clean looking, compact, and I think add to the overall polish and image of the tank in almost any decor or setting. The last segment we cover in every light is available features. These are the finishing touches that, when all other things are even, separate some of the lights from the pack. Mounting options, on and off-board controllability, aquarium controller compatibility, intuitive modes, build quality, and quiet operation. Believe it or not, mounting options is often one of the primary concerns with reef lighting, simply because so many of them require you to hang them from the ceiling. Even though that's often the cleanest look and often makes it the easiest to access the tank, a lot of reefers simply don't want to go through the hassle of hanging a light from the ceiling. So this is an area where the Radion really shines. They have a plethora of mounting options, including hanging them with or without the hanging kits, which allow for all kinds of different configurations. They also now have their RMS mounting solution, which is just an arm that bolts onto the tank, swivels, hides the cords, and looks extremely clean. Similar to that, they also have the multi-light RMS, which you can mount multiple Radions to, still swivel, hide the cords, and either use their leg option to mount it on the side of the tank or hang a single bar from the ceiling if you like. Mounting it securely and cleanly just isn't an issue. Controllability is kind of a double-edged sword with the Radion line. Some elements are awesome and some less so. I'll say right off the bat, I think they have the best software and interface out there. The PC and Mac software and the EcoSmart Live is the cleanest, most feature-rich, and capable solution I've seen on any light in our industry. This type of technology implementation is absolutely where they separate themselves from the pack. The interface allows you to fluidly control and set up the light for both daylight and lunar phases, traveling sunrise and sunsets that cross the tank, cloud simulations designed to give the corals a break, storms, super valuable acclimation modes. In general, just full control almost every aspect of the light via software, browser, or phone app. The online interface even allows you to control the Vortec power heads. Now that said, out of the box, the only way to access that awesome programming interface is by plugging your light into your PC or Mac computer, which is less than ideal in today's technology standards. Bringing your laptop to the aquarium or your lights to your computer just isn't very convenient when most of the other options on the market either come with the ability to program it on board or out of the box with wireless connectivity. Now all that is solvable with the Reef Link, which is a $99 box which connects via Wi-Fi and gives you all of the other connectivity options like the phone app and browser. I would say this is something a vast majority of reefers are going to want to pick up if they're selecting the Radions for their reef tank. There's also some onboard hard controls which allow you to switch modes, adjust settings, and other features, but the 3 buttons are not really designed to program the light, more just for convenience on a few functions. So all in all, I'd say it's the best interface and overall highest quality experience as long as you pick up the Reef Link. Otherwise, the hardware USB connection is a bit of a hassle for most reefers. The Radion is actually also controllable by probably the most popular advanced aquarium controller out there with the Apex. With the Apex WXM module, you can implement basically any program you want using the unified system you're using to control the rest of your reefing gear with. As to intuitive modes that help reefers find success with their tanks, I think they're one of the very few companies who have done this well. They have an interface which does give you the keys to the Spectrum Kingdom and a Kelvin simulator bar, but I think the real gems are in the scheduled templates they offer. Most significantly, the Coral Lab template, which allows you to select 3 different sub-templates with the SPS AB+, SPS PHX14, and the LPS Soft. That's because these templates are based off proven results. Almost all of the LEDs out there are more or less just soldering LEDs to a board and shipping them out the door with no real knowledge on how the lights perform or advice on how to use them properly. With Coral Labs, EcoTech has clearly demonstrated they're doing their due diligence to not only perfecting the light for its intended use, but also perform experiments with other partners to produce the best performance settings as well. You have the keys and you can tweak them from there if you want, but EcoTech is setting you up for success by giving you the programs based on real-world results and successes. Rounding up the last couple bits on the light, build quality in this light is obviously the top tier of everything on the market. They're using some of the highest quality LEDs in the market, and the design of the light is basically one giant heatsink designed to keep them cool and properly protect them. This is really a defining quality between some of the best lights out there and the rest of the imitators. Fan has also made some pretty significant gains in the G4. The microfins on the heatsink work better on both active and passive cooling, which reduces the speed of the fan and related noise. In most common installations, it'd be pretty difficult to hear that it's on. However, if you're running it at max, you'll probably have some audible fan noise. So what if you want one of these awesome lights for free? We're giving away all 4 of the Radion G4 or XR30s we tested today for free. Either click on that link that just showed up or head on over to the Bulk Reef site and click on the Specials and Deals tab, then Free Stuff to sign up. We all want to know what you think about the XR30 G4 because either you're considering one, have used them, or want to ask questions. So click on that link down below to head on over to our Reef to Reef thread. As always, if you think this type of in-depth look at reefing gear and methods is valuable, let us know with a quick thumbs up and subscribe because we release new reefing videos all week long and BRStv Investigates every Friday.